About a year and a half ago, right before COVID, I had the opportunity to work with an NGO in Ghana, Africa. While I was there, I met a woman whose story I'd like to share. Her story begins far before I ever arrived. Her name is Elizabeth. She had 10 kids, and through less than ideal circumstances, she became the sole provider for her family. All of these kids were relatively young at the time, and they needed an education. Elizabeth tried to provide for her kids and get them to school. However, this was far from easy. Elizabeth earned the equivalent of $2.50 a day, or around $65 a month. She did this through selling fried yams on the street in front of her home. That was barely enough to feed a tiny family, and for a family of 11, it was a huge stretch. Additionally, Elizabeth needed to get them an education. Tuition for every semester at the local school cost about $35. This may seem possible initially, until you realize that's per kid. And then it adds up for more than it's possible for her to earn. And on top of that, she still has to feed them, clothe them, and keep them safe. Education was extremely important to Elizabeth, and she was prepared to make sacrifices for it. At first, she tried sending a few of her boys to school and keeping her girls working to meet the cost. Unfortunately, that too failed. She resorted to her only option, giving her kids to an orphanage, where hopefully they could receive an ample education. She hoped that someday she would be able to provide for them again. The main problem here is poverty, but it's also education. Education is both expensive and difficult to access. All too often, mothers like Elizabeth are forced to make difficult decisions that no mother should have to make. These decisions also include having to prioritize which children can go to school. And when it comes down to it, boys often receive greater opportunities, leaving the women far behind. Education is vital to the development of any individual or developing state. Without education, girls are disadvantaged. As NGOs, we have a unique opportunity to play a central role in the advancement of women's education. We can't simply snap our fingers and make the problems vanish, but each of us can work together towards a brighter future.
Elizabeth is one example of a woman who is disadvantaged by the education system, but she's not a unique example. Women who lack education are directly impacted in their everyday life, and so are their children. Women with higher levels of education are likely to have fewer, healthier children, and are also more likely to have the financial means to send their children to school. These numbers are consistent in both developed and developing countries. When we talk about improving women's education on a global basis, often the first thing that comes to mind is women's education in developing countries. In developed countries, we've reached a point where women's education is nearly or entirely equal to that of men's education. While bias may still exist, developed countries provide an excellent demonstration of the possibility of women's education in all countries. It also provides a great example for how quickly improvement can take place once the seed is planted. The increased participation of women is a striking effect of educational development. However, it's just one part of the growth that results from breaking the cycle of poverty and lack of education. If we were able to completely close the gender gap in education worldwide, we would add wealth to the global GDP equivalent to 28 trillion US dollars in a 10-year period. Closing the gender gap is closely linked to lower child mortality, youth pregnancy, and sexual violence. And once the gap begins to close, it only increases in speed. Current numbers suggest that it will take approximately 108 years to close the gender gap and 202 years to achieve economic gender parity. When you take into consideration the fact that the modern form of humans evolved 200,000 years ago, the future is bright. Historically, women and girls have faced prejudice and even violence when trying to attain an education. Although this has gotten better with time, many people in developing countries still face extreme challenges in their path to a better future. In developed countries, some of us may be accustomed to a society in which education is relatively equal and fair for all genders. However, this was not always the case, and we should not take these things for granted. It has been a long and difficult process for women and girls to reach the level of equality that they have in education today. I'm going to go through a short timeline of women's progress in education in two developed countries, the United States of America and the United Kingdom. The narratives are parallel. In colonial America, elementary education was common. Most children were taught to read so that they could read the Bible. Only about 10% of the population attended any kind of secondary school, and the vast majority of that 10% were boys. Even the girls that could read could rarely write and would sign their names with a squiggle or an X. In the first half of the 19th century, education was still rare among both men and women. The notion of female college graduates was absurd, and there was focus on teaching girls to be ladylike. In the second half of the 19th century, progress began to happen, and rapidly. In 1865, the first women's college was founded, and several more quickly followed. Women were attracted to higher education, and soon a stream of female college graduates was produced. The first wave of feminism began in the early 20th century, and with it came more demand for women's rights to equal education. However, girls still tended to receive different education than boys. Their schooling focused more on things such as becoming a secretary or social service worker. There was little focus on making women into actual scholars instead of so-called domesticated citizens. Admission to graduate school proceeded as well. In 1945, Harvard Medical School admitted women for the first time. Just 2 years later, Marie Maynard Daly became the first Black woman to earn a PhD in chemistry. In 1972, the US passed federal legislation prohibiting discrimination in education based on sex. By 1980, men and women were equally enrolled in undergraduate colleges for the first time in US history. Presently, women actually outnumber men in number of bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees earned. In a similar manner in the United Kingdom, in 1972, the Sex Discrimination Act was passed, banning discrimination of the sex on the basis of sex in education. Like in the United States, girls have now overtaken boys in university attendance, with girls being 35% more likely to go to university than boys. As you can see, progress and equality in education is a slow and gradual process. More progress is needed.
It's a fairly well-known fact that in many developing countries today, women and girls lack equal access to education. In New Guinea, for example, boys receive 3.3 years more schooling than girls on average. In India, the difference is 3.4 years. In Afghanistan, it's 4.1. This is a massive discrepancy that disadvantages women, girls, and society as a whole. Women's education is just as important for their children as it is for themselves. Data from 68 countries included that women's education is key to a child's survival. Children of mothers with no education are 3.1 times more likely to die than those with mothers who are educated, and 1.6 times more likely to die than mothers who have a primary education. Outside of just survival, children of educated mothers are more likely to be educated themselves.
You would just hire somebody.
This applies to both primary and secondary school, as well as higher education. Part of why women's education in developing countries is flawed is when it comes down to sheer economic disadvantagement. There are strong correlations between poverty and an uneducated population. One leads to the other and vice versa. It's a vicious cycle. Of course, the causes of the underlying economic issues are complex and multifaceted.
These are some young people talking. I wouldn't
Obstacles
say
in
naive,
developing
but it's
countries
oversimplistic.
are
That's okay.
also slow the progress of women's education. Let's look at India, where for every 100 boys not enrolled in primary school, there are 426 girls not enrolled. Look at the Middle East and North Africa, where women where families often make greater investments in
Education.
education for boys
Oh.
than girls. The problem isn't localized to one specific area or country, but it's widespread across many developing countries.
So
Cultural obstacles
that's fine. Oops, did I lose her? I just lost her.
hold children to school. Male children are often prioritized. Many girls in developing countries are held back by traditional gender roles that marginalize a female's role in society. Neither poverty nor sexist cultural attitudes will disappear overnight. Developing countries are, by definition, developing. With proper initiatives and support, they can reach the level of personal liberty and economic privilege that developed countries enjoy. It takes time and effort, including persistent efforts to raise awareness about the issues itself and its causes. On a larger scale, many organizations and individuals working to help remedy some of the serious challenges women face in obtaining an education. In an ideal world, I think that developed countries should fund and implement more exchange programs. That way we can give women and men opportunities for a better life.
We're already in the process. The work we've done in women's education over the past 200 years is greater than thousands of years before. What do we know about how we've done it? In some ways, our world is like a living organism or a body. Our human bodies are amazing. We have the capability to experience the world around us in multiple dimensions. We can smell, we can touch, we can hear, we can see, we can think for ourselves. Our bodies aren't perfect. Sometimes they get hurt. And when we're hurt, it stops us from progressing and using our bodies as we did before. Sometimes it cuts us off from experiencing those dimensions and sensations of the world. But hurt isn't the end of the road. The human body, given time and the proper conditions, can heal from most kinds of injuries. The body will heal a broken leg or a concussion with proper nutrition and rest. And the further the body comes in the healing process, the stronger it grows, the easier it becomes to heal the wound. But we don't ask our bodies to heal without help. We have ways to assist them. Things like medicine, treatment, and physical therapy facilitate progress. Modern medicine helps the body return to its previously healthy state, and sometimes even beyond that. Similarly, we can hope that the pain and problems experienced in the world, including in education and women's rights, will begin to heal from the inside. But sometimes it requires a little nudge. The stronger we are, the faster we heal, and the faster we heal, the stronger we grow. When women's social and physical needs are taken into account and protected, they feel safer pursuing occupations and hobbies outside the cultural norm. In most situations, the greatest barriers to a woman receiving education are the cultural rules of her society. And that's a difficult topic to address. Culture is a beautiful aspect of our world, and it's important to protect it when we can, as long as we're still protecting the people who make it beautiful. Every culture has aspects that harm its members. In many cultures today, women are victims of cultural practices that prevent them from excelling. In many cases, they even prevent them from the bare minimum a woman should be offered, living a happy, healthy life with opportunity for growth. Luckily, protecting women's rights often goes hand in hand with protecting a culture. Prioritizing women in marginalized groups would theoretically have a similar effect to prioritizing women in general. If we could add trillions of dollars to global GDP by empowering women, how much good could they do in their communities? How much could they empower the cultures they come from? How can outside forces help the body to heal itself? If we want to help a culture heal from the inside out, we need to look at examples of how this has happened in the past. A young woman named Navali Kumari came from a rural district in India. When she was young, she had the opportunity to move with her father to a wealthier district where there was a school, and she was able to attain a secondary education. Unfortunately, shortly after she received her degree, she had to move back to her original district when her father passed away. When she got there, she was shocked and dismayed to realize that none of the women or girls in the village had gone to secondary school. In fact, there wasn't even a school in the village that they could go to. Novelli knew that she had to do something about the situation. She didn't know what, but she started anyway. In the end, she enrolled 46 girls in school and stopped 2 child marriages. Eventually, through her efforts, a school was even built in her village, allowing the process of development and education for women to continue even further. Novelli's story isn't unique. She's not the only woman who has seen something lacking in her society and made a move to change it. She's not even the only person who's done that. We have women and people who see problems in their cultures and societies that are working to change them every day. The wonderful thing about people changing their societies from the inside is that they understand the different aspects and the diverse situations that these people come from. They understand religious, ethnic, and socio-political backgrounds, even if the people in the village don't understand themselves. When we help people from the communities change their own communities in the ways that they see best, we allow them to have a different take on the situation. We allow them to understand their community from the inside and help change it to get to the outside. It's about mutual respect. We want to give equal power and responsibility to people in developing countries because they truly understand the circumstances that the people around them come from. They truly understand the relationships that are formed and the way that the cultures work. Part of the process of development is the need to develop a culture that, in some broad way, can transcend diverse economic, ethnic, political, racial, and religious backgrounds. We can't do that when we don't have people from all different walks of life. We don't have the power to remove the cultural issues, but we can facilitate cultural development by finding principles that we agree on to work towards. Outside help, inside method.
Let's go back to the story at the beginning, the story of Elizabeth, one woman and one family among hundreds of families in need. Her daughters were just a few among millions needing education. When we left off the story, she had given up, in a sense, and given her children to an orphanage. She had failed to provide for them and to give them an education. Without her family, she hit a really low point in her life. It was in this deteriorating state that an NGO found her a few years later. This NGO helped jumpstart her business. Now, in addition to the fried yams, she sells fresh fruit year-round. This doubled her income. It took several years, but she was eventually able to get her children back. And this time, she was able to provide for them and give them an education. The NGO made a big difference to Elizabeth and to her family. What the NGO did might not seem very big from a brief glance. It didn't fix the education system as a whole, but it did enable this one family, this one woman, to receive an education. This was an ideal outcome. Obviously, not all situations are resolved so smoothly. We may not be able to fix world education issues immediately, as we obviously wish we could, but we must start somewhere. Each of us can influence our own little circle, and each of us can take a stand for women's education. We can do that through supporting existing NGOs that are making a difference and/or through striving to make changes in our own circles. In some cases, that may mean changing how we do things in our NGO or in our lives. Personally, I'm always looking for things to improve, and one of the reasons I'm here at the UN is to make contact with new NGOs and find ways to help each other in our common goal of opportunities for women.
So since we've been talking a lot about NGOs and what they do to help people in developing countries, and we know we have some people who have worked in NGOs here, we thought we would get some input from you. So there's a QR code on the screen that you should see now, and there's also a link to a website and a code that you can put in if the QR code doesn't work for you. And we'd love to get some feedback about the things that you've done that you've seen provide changes in developing communities for women, or things that you've seen other people do. So we're gonna get some of those coming in soon, and we'll share some. I also know we've had some comments on the Zoom, so we could talk about those as well. And we'll just give you a couple minutes to do that so we can get some answers in. So we've got a few answers up here. Caitlin, do you want to talk about these a little bit?
So our first one is just like listening to others and asking what they need. which I feel like is really important, especially because like we don't know their culture, but they do.
Yeah. And just knowing what people need. We can't go in there and assume that we know everything about their situation and what they're going to need for help from us. So that's really awesome. I see the use of social media to engage and inform people on what's new. That's super cool because I know, like, in this new age that we're in, we have a lot of different options of ways to inform people of what needs to be done and the struggles that people are experiencing. And I know I've experienced that too. There's been a lot of things that the first time I've heard about them is over social media, and then I got to do more research of them. So that's awesome. Educate women, teach them specific marketable skills so that they can proceed further. That's super cool.
Teaching people to advance themselves is good.
Break large goals into smaller, doable, measurable steps. I love that one because you kind of have this situation where, we have these huge goals, like we want to educate all the women in the world, but we have to have individual steps for how we're going to get there. And so I love that, you have to create a specific plan for how you're going to make these things happen, because we can make them happen, but we have to have a way to do it. Having available resources is key. Absolutely. Yeah, because it's all well to just talk about things that you want to happen, but if you can't actually help them.
Another person mentioned that to directly work and listen to the fellow members that are part of our goals and missions, and to take their recommendations and listen to those. I think that's another important thing to remember, which is probably what we're doing here, is like to get feedback from other people, and see how to do better.
Having engaging conversations with tasks that everyone can participate in. Yeah, that is one of the sustainable development goals. And here we're talking about the 5th right now, is educating women and getting gender parity worldwide. It's not complicated, but practical and makes an impact on the whole family. Awesome. So giving girls opportunities to speak in public. Interesting, yeah, with full support to encourage change in their group. I just think that, girls and women have so much power when we give them the opportunity to talk about the things that they want to talk about and just encourage them to take advantage of the skills that they do have. Okay, well, these are some really awesome answers we've got here. Thank you to everyone who contributed. We really love hearing what other people are doing to further education for women and gender parity and just help the world in general. I think we're gonna close up around this time. So thank you all for coming to this presentation and for being here to listen to us. I hope that each of you will think about what you can do to help improve the state of women's education.
Thanks, everyone.